Housing, childcare, two of the most important aspects of discussion in the state when it comes to our economy, and holes when it comes to the need that the state has in order to develop our economy. There's all sorts of different opinions and the best ways to handle it, but I was really excited to see at least some analysis on the data come from the New Hampshire Fiscal Policy Institute. And today I am joined by Nicole Heller, who is a senior policy analyst over there. Also, thank you to Dexter Tarbox, contributor over at the New England Take, for joining the show. Also, he recently had an op-ed published in the Union Leader, which I was excited to see. We both were in that paper this month, so excited to see the New England Take crew get a little bit of recognition. Welcome back.
Hey, AJ, great to see you.
So I want to start off with giving a quick plug to New Hampshire Fiscal Policy Institute is having their 2023 Budget and Policy Conference on October 16th from 8 to 4. If you go to nhfpi.org/conference, you can check that out. These guys have all the data and all the time, and it's always interesting to see the reports that come out. But let's start off with, I will link to this in the episode description, but Gene Martin, who is the executive director over at NHFPI, with the team, wrote an op-ed that was in the New Hampshire Bulletin titled "Investments in Childcare Will Be Key to Granite State's Economic Future." It was an interesting read. There were takes on it that I'm like, yeah, that makes sense. It's very expensive, obviously, which is something we're definitely talking about. The opinion side, Dexter and I probably have a little bit of disagreement with the outcomes that are written in it. But either way, it's definitely a very important topic. So let's just start off with Nicole. The data that you guys were pulling, like, where did it come from, and how did you work it to come to some of these conclusions?
Yeah, great question, AJ. Thank you again for having me on the show. Our data came from the American Community Survey with the U.S. Census Bureau. That's where we get our numbers for how many children under 6 live in New Hampshire. It allows us to see what our median household incomes are, to be able to get a gauge of how much folks can afford. We also rely on the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services. They've made a note that childcare should be about 7% of a household's income to be affordable. And then we also use information from New Hampshire's Department of Health and Human Services in order to get a sense of how many providers are in the state, how many have we lost since COVID, since before COVID and throughout the past 3 years. And we also use their information in order to get a sense of capacity. And we use the Bureau of Labor Statistics to get the wages for the child care workforce and the numbers that are there.
I mean, what's the estimate of amount of children, what percent of the children in the 0 to 6 age range that there's a need for childcare to be provided? Do we have any idea on that?
Yeah, so we use numbers. The tricky part is the census is always about a year behind. So the closest we have are 2021 numbers. And using that information of the number of children under 6 who have a parent, if they live with only one parent or both parents in the workforce, as well as the number of childcare spots in the state of New Hampshire, we're looking at about a shortage of 8,000 childcare spots if every one of those families need childcare. Now, we fully recognize that not every family is going to want to take their children to a provider. They may have a family member, a friend that they want to care for their child, but that gives us a rough estimate of how many childcare spots we would need if every working family needed childcare.
Yeah, and then the number, I feel like this is important to highlight before we continue much more, but the estimated cost annually would be $28,340 if you have an infant and a 4-year-old in childcare. And at first I was like, that doesn't seem right. And then I did the math when my kid went to daycare until he was 4 years old, because we were both working parents. And yeah, it was about $200 a week. And guess what? Every week, and now with inflation and the shortage, it definitely has an impact on the economics of that cost. So it makes sense it went up at 20%.
Yeah, absolutely. And when we start thinking about the true cost of care, which is part of this conversation and one we're looking forward to having at the conference. Even though those prices are high, that doesn't cover the operating costs for the child care providers. So they are still struggling in terms of making their ends meet, because the true cost of care would also include things like providing professional development for their teachers, having great resources for their kids to have enrichment activities, healthy food for lunches and snacks, and a lot of other pieces that come into play in order to provide high quality care. So even though it's expensive, it doesn't actually cover the full cost of what the providers need.
Well, I have some thoughts and some questions on this, of course. But before even getting into those, what I'm wondering is the precise nature of the proposal here. This is a subsidy that's being proposed, correct, in the form of tuition aid?
Well, are you referring to the child care scholarships in New Hampshire?
Scholarship, that's the word I was looking for, yes.
Yeah, so New Hampshire has a child care scholarship, and those come from a combination of federal funds. So there's a child care development grant. These are block funds that come down from the federal government that subsidize child care for families who qualify.
And is any of that, again, just getting the appropriate background information here, is any of that state funds?
I will have to check with my team on that in terms of state funds. We also have several programs through COVID relief funding of the ARPA funds, American Rescue Plan Act funds, that are going to a variety of different programs to help put in long-term infrastructure pieces that'll help keep the costs hopefully lower for families and make providers able to give the best care they can to families.
So it is then essentially, though, a taxpayer subsidy for childcare, correct?
As far as I know, yes.
My principal concern from where I come from, whenever we consider any government subsidy, taxpayer-funded government subsidy, is that, in my view, it tends to detach the cost of a service from its actual value. So we see this, for instance, in higher education, where the intervention of sort of no questions asked government backing of student loans has caused the cost of higher education to just massively grow and well beyond the rate of inflation. Similar in home mortgage lending, and likewise, at least in large part, in healthcare. So it's clear to me that, of course, both the demand for and the cost of childcare already have very steadily increased in recent years. So the question this raises for me is A, whether further subsidies would exacerbate the pricing issues that we've encountered in these other sectors, and of course B, whether subsidies would only target the symptom and not the root cause of this mounting need for outside childcare.
Cost of care for childcare is not the same as the price. So what families pay, and as AJ mentioned, it's considerable amount of a household income, doesn't actually cover the cost. And part of this is related to things like safety. Teachers can only oversee or watch so many children. So for example, with infants, the child-teacher ratio is 4-to-1 for safety reasons. When children get up to the age of 4, they're able to watch one teacher to 12 children. So we can't lower the cost of childcare simply by putting more infants in a classroom. It's not safe. So because of that, we're not able to even out the pricing in the way that we might be able to do in something like public schools, where if the rooms have the capacity, we could add more children. We can't add 10 babies to a classroom. That would be
terrifying.
And potentially terrifying if you are unfamiliar with working with babies.
I can't imagine 10 all at the same time of the same age, and guess what? If you're a childcare provider every year, oh, they're infants again. Oh no. It continues.
So part of that does limit the cost. And then there's also the piece of if folks are already paying $23,000 a year for an infant and a 4-year-old, how much more can a provider charge for that. So it speaks to some of the market mismatch, and childcare doesn't work like a typical service or good in which demand goes up, supply is down, price goes up. There's really a limit to how much providers can charge in a region before no one can afford that rate. And that's where the subsidies come in order to help the providers stay open. And it's not just for the investment in the children. Now, I come from a developmental psychology background, so I can speak to, we want to invest in the children so they're ready for school and they succeed in those ways. But it's a labor force support. Families can't work if there's no one to watch their children. So this service is vital. And in order to have people in the labor force and grow our economy, investing in childcare is the way that folks are able to afford it, and providers can still offer their services at a price that folks can afford.
But is there no concern that those market restrictions that exist currently might be eliminated by the presence of increasing subsidies? Because, of course, a professor or a physician or indeed even a home loan also aren't priced like typical services.
Right, but it does work differently than some of those other markets do. So it's unique in that way. And it, again, is different than those services in that parents can't work if they don't have childcare.
I guess for me that comes down to my where I'm with the op-ed up until the conclusion, because I think, I'm curious if you are aware of maybe comparisons to other states or other time periods when it comes to this. Right now we're in a situation where in our economy both parents have to work. Housing is so expensive. Just cost of living has gone up so much. There's various aspects when it comes to that. The impact of, hey, guess what? Everyone in my generation basically was pushed in college. So guess what? You got student loans for God knows how long, which is also has a tremendous impact on the financial income that a family is able to have. I mean, is the root cause of this or one of the root causes of this the fact that both parents have to work, as opposed to being able to have that situation where one parent's able to afford to stay home and raise the children, which is the traditional way it was the case 50 years ago, for example?
I don't think that we live in an economy that would allow one person to work, given the price of mortgages, our rents, childcare. It really is an economy where both parents need to work in order to afford. I think we're looking at least rental prices for a 2-bedroom in New Hampshire, $1,700 a month with utilities. I don't know a lot of jobs that would allow someone to be able to hold down that living situation without having two folks in the workforce.
Because that's my other question, the second part of my question as well. And I think talking about the cost of living is certainly an important part of it. But whether subsidies in this case would only target the symptom and not the root cause of the issue. I hate to be too direct in it, but if indeed the increased demand for childcare is just merely a symptom of a societal ill, which could be better addressed directly, it seems more important we attack those issues before putting the broader tax base on the hook for people's nannies, to be frank.
Can you describe to me what you mean by the symptom and the solution in the case of childcare?
Well, in terms of the symptom, I mean the mounting cost and the mounting demand for childcare, which is something that we're seeing. I think, as the article that we're discussing here pointed out, it's just precipitously increasing to this enormous level. Whereas the cause might be, as you suggested, the cost of living. I have some suggestions which I could mention that might also play into the cause. But again, I just wonder if we're attacking here the symptom before we're attacking the root causes. I could suggest some things, but I didn't know if you had any further thoughts on cost of living or how some of the basic other causes of this rise in demand might be driven.
It is reflected in the national numbers as well. I was looking specifically at New England earlier today, and the child care rates Massachusetts has higher rates. They're up and around the 24,000.
Is it expensive to live there?
But New Hampshire's up there, but Vermont and Maine are not too far behind. And so this is reflective of things going on in the United States, and may reflect on what AJ was saying in terms of the generation of people who have young children right now needing to have two people in the workforce in order to pay for housing, childcare, food costs, and all of the inflation-related economic demands of families currently. But I'd love to hear more about your thoughts, Dexter.
Well, let me ask this. Do you not find that single-parent households, the increasing prevalence of single-parent households, or co-parenting relationships that don't involve a married couple might play into this mounting increase in the demand for childcare that we see?
I don't have data to support that.
What I would suggest that were the state to do, and again, this is a suggestion on my part, so take of it what you will, of course. But I would suggest that were the state to do away with, for instance, no-fault divorce, which to my mind inherently undermines the role of marriage as a necessary institution, the central purpose of which is the raising of children, would to me be a much more equitable policy solution than a subsidy, which both potentially lends itself to further price inflation, as we've discussed in these other cases, and diminishes this very weighty child-rearing obligation that comes with marriage and procreation. So again, to me, this is a policy suggestion that I would consider more addressing of the root cause than, as I say, the symptom.
Dexter, are you suggesting that the policy solution is that folks don't get divorced?
Well, I say no-fault divorce might be eliminated in the state, not as the sole policy solution, but a suggestion which, again, attacks root causes rather than symptoms. And I'm not posing this blankly. I'm quite interested in what your opinion is.
NHFPI, we base our information on facts and data, and I currently do not have any data to speak about in terms of what you're proposing, Dexter.
But it'd be interesting to see, wouldn't it? Is it not something we might study?
To my knowledge, we don't have numbers and data to support those summations.
I think it's too much of an issue that we're at least in defense of the New Hampshire Fiscal Policy Institute with regards to this, is if there's data that can be tracked, they're able to track it down. But in the current state of our culture in this country and laws in this country, we're not in that situation where the data could be accurately tracked, taking aside any and all ethical one way or the other when it comes to it. But what's interesting to see with the data with this, it at least raises these questions so policymakers can consider these sorts of things one way or another, whether it is funding more childcare support, whether it's a matter of the way we handle laws when it comes to divorce, and and also just in general regulations when it comes to childcare facilities. My question to take this in another direction a little bit. What's the opinion of childcare facilities when it comes to the current costs? Like, do we have any information when it comes to, like, are childcare facilities happy where the salaries for their staff are at? Are they believing that they're not able to pay their staff enough considering the demand?
Well, I can't speak on behalf of the providers, but I can provide information that, according to the Bureau of Labor and Statistics, the average wage for a child care worker in New Hampshire is $13 an hour in 2022. So it's really difficult to retain and recruit a workforce with salaries at that level when folks can do something else and make more. And childcare, you alluded to this a bit, AJ, but childcare is an emotionally and physically demanding job. And so in that way, folks may be drawn to other career options, other jobs, instead of staying with the childcare provider.
I mean, fortunately, when you get over to school, that begins to mitigate. But of course, the people that are looking for childcare, especially, are going to be in that 0 through 6 age range, which is extremely difficult and time-consuming. The reason why many businesses are considering providing childcare as an in-house option or providing supports around those matters. But either way, I think this is an important subject that we'll continue to talk about from a policy perspective. And guess what? The House is very close again over here, over in Concord. So the fall will continue to be just off the rails with some discussions on this. But I think it's productive in the long run, and I'm happy to have the New Hampshire Fiscal Policy Institute willing to have these. These are tough conversations. I don't care what side of the aisle you're on. These are tough conversations, and I'm happy you guys are putting it out there with ideas and data. So thanks so much, Nicole Heller, for joining me today.
Thanks for having me, AJ.
So definitely, please be sure to check out nhfpi.org/conference for their upcoming conference on October 16th, Tackling Workforce Challenges and Strengthening Economic Security. It goes way beyond childcare. Housing is another important aspect that was also written about, and I'll be putting all this stuff in the episode description. Thank you so much also, Dexter, for joining me. We will be definitely be having more conversations with all aspects of things like this in the future. Check out the newenglandtake.com, like and subscribe if you are on the YouTubes, and find the podcast on all your favorite podcast platforms.